Hello Nancy Drew fans, welcome back to another book to game comparison video. In this recording I am looking at The Captive Curse. I will start by looking at the novel. This is called Captive Witness and was originally published in 1981. And then I will examine the game, which is The Captive Curse and was released in 2011. So as usual, a spoiler alert is in effect because, well, I'm going to spoil everything. So please consider yourselves warned. So with that, let's look at the novel. So this book is called Captive Witness, and it's number 64 in the series. And you can look at it as both a digest paperback as well as a hardcover. As noted, it was originally published in 1981, and back then it was published as a paperback. However, in 2005, Grosset and Dunlap republished it as a hardcover. And this was a bit of a limited run that they had done. This book as well as a few others in the series. And that is actually why you see a picture of the hardcover edition of the story, because that's the one I have. So now let's get down to the actual story. And it is rather complicated. So Nancy, Bess, and George have joined the Emerson College Austrian tour, which is led by Professor Raymond Bagley. And as soon as they land, trouble greets them. Someone tries to steal the professor's bag. They are, however, unsuccessful because the sleuths, if you want to call them sleuths before the mystery's even really begun, intervene and they recover his bag. This is not, however, the only problem that the group encounters. There's trouble with their bus. There's trouble with a wheelchair that keeps getting stolen and then magically reappears. Their hotel rooms have been canceled. There are a whole bunch of shenanigans that the group is dealing with. And Nancy, sort of tweaks to this pretty early on that there's something going on more than just this being a tour. And what she learns is that Dr. Bagley, though he is a professor, he has previously worked in American intelligence and he's involved in a plot. And this is a plot to help transport 10 refugee children across the border from Hungary to Austria. And there is a student on this tour who is also involved in this. And Nancy is very quickly eager to help with this. But that is why there's been some trouble because of this plot, as well as because of Nancy's other reason for being in Austria. So she's not just there for a college tour, lovely though it would be just to go and have some fun overseas. She has been tasked by her father to help recover, hopefully, a film that was stolen. And there is a film festival in Vienna that's to take place in a few days' time, and there is a documentary that is quite powerful, and a copy from the States was stolen and the original copy destroyed. So they're hoping that Nancy can track it down. They believe it's in Vienna and recover it in time for the film festival. So looking at characters, there are a fair few. So as already noted, we have Professor Raymond Bagley. So he is the professor who's leading this tour group, but also is helping with this plan to help these 10 orphans. Then we have Eric Nagy, and I apologize if I mispronounce his name. He is the student who's also involved in this plot. Part of the reason is because he's Hungarian, he can speak the language, and one of the orphans is a cousin of his. And it's his wheelchair, by the way, that keeps getting stolen. Next we have Emil Popov, and he and his wife are with the 10 orphans. They're the ones who bring them to the border on the Hungarian side. Next we have Herr Adolf Gutermann, or Heinrich Hagedorn. So obviously he has an alias, and he's really the one who's behind a lot of the trouble that the group encounters. And we find out later on that he has a history with Kessler, and really a lot of his actions have to do with Kessler. To a degree, the children, but not entirely. It's quite complex. And I won't get into too many of those details. I don't want to spoil the whole book. And then finally we have Kurt Kessler, and he's the one who's made the documentary, which is titled Captive Witness. And it's all about the oppression that people were experiencing in Hungary. And they imagine that it was stolen so that you don't see this negative frame on the country. But he desperately wants it recovered so that it can be shown at the film festival. So despite all this trouble, despite kidnappings even, and being tailed, Nancy and her friends do manage to rescue the children and bring them over to Austria. And then as for her second case, with the help of Kessler, they're able to locate the building where captive witness is being kept, as well as who has it and why. So that is captive witness, just sort of the bare bones in some ways, because as noted, it's very complex. There's so much going on. I mean, we barely scraped the surface in this little rundown. So, although I said I'm spoiling things, and I am, there's so much more, and I don't want to get into too many details because it is a very interesting read, and I highly encourage people to pick up a copy of this book, hardcover or paperback, or even an ebook. So with that, now let's take a look at the game. So of course this game is The Captive Curse. It's number 24 in the Nancy Drew PC game series. And in this mystery, Nancy's asked to investigate a monster that keeps reappearing in Germany at Castle Finster. And while she's there, she finds many references, not just to past monster sightings, but these disappearances of girls over the years. And questioning, are they related? Are the girls disappearing because of the monster? And what is the monster? And then there's a fear that Nancy may be the next victim of the current monster. Who, is it a new monster? Is it the same monster? What is the story about this beast and why is it at Castle Finster? So Nancy's not only investigating that, she's also occupied with pranks, board games galore, and coded messages. So there's actually quite a lot going on at Castle Finster. So the characters in this story include Karl Weschler, who is the Burgermeister or mayor of Castle Finster, and he doesn't seem to enjoy his job at all. He loves board games, and I think that's where he'd like to spend his time, is just playing games. Then we have Anja Mittelmeier, who is the Castellan and is really in charge of the hospitality services at the castle. Then we have her nephew, Lucas Mittelmeier, who is a bit of a lonely young boy who loves pranks. He just gets a kick out of them. He is the king of pranks. We then have Renata Stoller, who is a traveling storyteller, and often she returns to Castle Finster when there's talk of the monster. And then finally, I'm going to make note of a phone contact, so not a physical character, and this is Marcus Boehm. He owns Castle Finster, and he is the one who's brought Nancy in to solve this mystery. So Nancy briefly thinks she's seen the true monster and has caught him, and it turns out to be Lucas. He's dressed up as the monster as part of a prank. He is not, however, the monster that everyone's been seeing, because when he's found dressed as the monster, we see the real monster just outside. And that turns out to be his aunt, Anja. She is behind the monster attacks, and her actions are revenge against Marcus, which I will talk a bit further about in a little bit. So that, folks, is The Captive Curse. So now, my favorite part and the most difficult part, particularly for this set of stories. We are comparing the book and game. So the titles are very similar. We have The Captive Witness, that is the book, or rather Captive Witness, there's no the, and The Captive Curse, and that's the game. So similar. I don't know if they're both suitable. I mean, Captive Witness makes sense for the book because that is the title of the film, and sort of talking about witnessing atrocities. That's sort of an underlying current throughout the story. Whereas The Captive Curse for the game, I don't know. I've always thought it was a very strange title. I don't think it fits the game at all. But neither does the book that it's based off of. So there you go. So I'm not really going to dwell on the title. I'm going to move to storyline next. So for the book, Nancy seeks to recover a documentary as well as helping to rescue 10 children from Hungary. Then we look at the game. Nancy investigates monster sightings along with the centuries-old legend in Bavaria. As you can see, those two storylines are nothing alike. And this is why comparing is very difficult. Yeah, they are entirely different. There's no overlap. Not even the slightest. Well, okay. They're both in Europe. In Western Europe. And that's about it. Which leads me to the next part, location. So the book is set in Austria. I mean, there's a slight bit of Hungary, but really it's set in Austria. And the game is set in Germany. So different locations, though they're both in Europe. Now, I debated whether or not to even do this part. I always look at characters. Had I not done this, this would pretty much be the end of the comparison video. So I will go over the characters, but there's absolutely no overlap. And again, this is why this comparison is so difficult. It's because I can't compare, because they are two entirely unique stories. But with that, I will still go in and talk about the characters. So I'll start with everyone from the book first, starting with Dr. Bagley. So as noted already, he'd previously worked with American intelligence, and he's helping a repatriation group move 10 children from Hungary to Austria. And the college tour, again, is a guise for this mission. Then we have Eric. He is bound to a wheelchair, or so we think, dun dun dun. And his family is originally from Hungary. He's helping the professor with this task, and one of the children is a cousin of his. Next is Emil. He and his wife are part of the rescue effort and have brought those children to the border crossing. He also meets with Dr. Bagley, Nancy, Eric, and Ned. Ned eventually gets filled in on what's going on because there's a bit of trouble that happens, and they sort of have to replan how they're going to move the children. Then Earl Guterman, he is using an alias, and he's been tasked with preventing Kessler from showing his documentary. That is really his ultimate scheme. Even though what he's doing also impacts the rescue of the children, it's mostly about preventing that documentary from seeing the light of day. But at the same time, he's willing to give up his copy of Captive Witness for Kessler himself. So he does have another bit of a motive. And what we learn is that the two have a history, Guterman and Kurt. So let's talk about Kurt first. So he's a well-respected filmmaker, and as already noted, his documentary Captive Witness was stolen before the Vienna Film Festival, and the original copy was destroyed. And the documentary aims to share the atrocities experienced in Hungary. So Kurt and Guterman have a history. They were in prison together. They both suffered a great deal. And Guterman, it's not necessarily that he wants revenge, but he's very troubled and he's having a hard time. And Kurt, I guess, was a bit more successful in the end. And I think that compounded with other factors has made things very difficult for Guterman, which is why he's willing to give up Captive Witness for Kessler himself. Again, it's very complicated and well worth reading the book to learn what's going on here. So now I'll look at the game-only characters, and I'll start with Carl. So again, he's the Burgermeister, and he's responsible for the happenings at Castle Finster. And he's petrified of the monster. He seems to hate responsibility. He's also really scared that he brings trouble wherever he is because he's seen his doppelganger. He's also infatuated with board games, and he designs a game, and that's really his life ambition, is to succeed in the board game industry. Anya, we'll look at next. So she's the Castellan. She works directly with the guests. We learn that she lied on her resume, and she is the one behind the role of the monster. She's the one who's been causing chaos, and this is to get back at Marcus, who we learn is her ex-boyfriend. And she's really fixated on how that relationship ended and how awful it was, which is, quite sad if this is the extent that she's willing to go to not just hurt Marcus, but to everyone living at the castle. So she is struggling, I guess is one way to put it. Next, we'll look at Lucas. So, as noted in the game, he's the castle's other monster. He's the best kind of monster. And he's a boy who just loves to prank people, particularly Carl, because Carl's really good at noticing pranks. Lucas is a lot of fun. But, he wants to have fun, but has a hard time doing that because he is a little different from everyone else. And he has a hard time making friends. And then we have Renata, so she is our last physical character in the game. She's a traveling storyteller. She often returns to Castle Finster when rumors of the monsters start to cycle again. And what we learn, depending on how you play the game and how much it sort of reflects how much information you get about how you play, you will learn that as a child she lost her sister in the castle's woods. So she has really quite a painful connection to the monster and to this place, and that's why she keeps coming back. And depending on how you play the game and resolve it, there's a good chance that maybe she's ready to move on. And finally, we've got Marcus. So he's a new owner of the castle. He just wants Nancy to root out the monster so the guests can enjoy visiting the place. He's really laid back in his approach to management. But also a little wild. And he used to date Anya. And he's quite surprised, or was quite surprised when he learned that she was working there, but just sort of fine with it and doesn't really think too much about her being there and how she got to be there. He's a bit aloof at times. So those are all the characters from the books and game. Book, not books. The two different printings of a single book. And then I just have 3 last little points here before I get to the conclusion. So, like I said, there's not really a lot of overlap in these stories, but I tried. I tried to find something to compare. So, dressing up does happen in both stories. So, in the book, Nancy and her pals disguise themselves in order to fulfill their mission of rescuing the orphans. And then in the game, everyone's sort of dressed up in traditional Bavarian clothing. So, this was a bit of a stretch, but I'm making it happen. I'm making it work. And then Lost Children, this is a bit heavier. I shouldn't say a bit heavier, it's absolutely heavier than everything else. In the book, we have these children who've been separated from their families. And their families have already landed in Austria, so really it's just about reuniting them. Whereas in the game, it's much more tragic and upsetting. There are these stories of girls who have disappeared over the years, and this is blamed on a monster. But you also have to wonder what kind of monster. Is it a beast that's not human, or is it human? Or are woods just a dangerous place in the dark? Yeah, it can be a bit upsetting and scary. So we do have this theme, you could say, of lost children in the 2 stories. And then the last thing is politics. So in the book, government oppression and cruelty are the focus of Kurt's documentary, and for the rescue of the children. That's because of what's happening in Hungary in the book. So quite serious. We don't typically see a lot of politics in these stories. And then in the game, again, here's a bit of a stretch, but Carl is a political figure, and he disagrees with Marcus's plans for the castle. So there's my attempt at finding overlap in these 2 stories. So let's conclude. So the novel Captive Witness and the game The Captive Curse share very little in common beyond the word captive in their titles and, taking place in Europe. But really their stories are nothing alike. One really focuses on politics and oppression, while the other is talking about monster sightings and revenge. We don't even have events that overlap, which we sometimes do even if they're set up differently. There's none of that between these 2 stories, which has made this comparison so difficult. And really, her interactive story might as well have been based, I put that in air quotes, because it's not really based on this story, but it should have been based on another novel, because there's probably a Nancy Drew story out there that relates to a monster or a beast of some sort. And that might have been more fitting to this game. So their choice of book would have been quite difficult to adapt into a game. Captive Witness, the storyline is so heavy and complex that had they even tried to follow the storyline, I don't know that they really would have been able to. And I did find the book far more interesting than the game. Really couldn't care less about the monster sighting, and I don't think the delivery of the story for the game worked. They're fantastic lines. Like, the dialogue is great for the most part in this game, but the actual story, the plot, just fails for me. The book is far more interesting and intriguing, but as noted, I think it would be very hard to adapt it to a game. So I don't think this was actually a suitable choice for them, saying that they're basing their game off of the book Captive Witness. So there we go. That's my comparison video. This was a tough one. I've been putting this off because I knew it was going to be hard. And yeah, just not fun. I love it when I can actually pick out things. And I tried. I stretched, was able to find a few things. Again, mostly the lost children, which is probably the most depressing thing about this video. And a bit about politics and dressing up. But really, these two stories are not the same. To say that The Captive Curse is based off of Captive Witness is, and this is not a nice way to put it, but it is to me essentially a lie. It's not. The two stories are not related. I know at one point Her Interactive really was essentially writing their own stories from scratch, but they had to say that they were basing them off of books. And I think they could have done a better job at looking for a book that was more along the same storyline as the game that they wrote. So really they failed at trying to find overlap. So, and I remember the first time I read this book, or I shouldn't say the first time I read it because it was released before the game. But I remember when the game came out, I remember having read this book because if I remember correctly, this is almost like a 2-part book. I can't remember if it's the one before or the one after, but I feel like there's a continuation somewhere. But I remember thinking there wasn't a monster. This was a very political book. So it's such a strange choice, and we are going to see a lot more of that as we progress through the series. But it is something I find very disappointing and in some ways a waste of a good book. I mean, had they tried to adapt this, I don't think they would have been successful. It would have been very difficult and really so heavy. I mean, this is also kind of a heavy game, but this story, this novel, wasn't given, I don't even know how to put it. It just didn't get the game it deserved, I guess. Because this is a chaotic but powerful book, very political. And I mean, with the current time, it may not have been appropriate either to adapt it. And I mean, they don't have to have based it on Hungary and Austria or any of that, but they could have changed it to make it more relatable to present day, or 2011, politics, or even not even being political at all. But no, they just wrote their own story and took the word captive from a book to put into the title of their game. That seems to me what they've done. Yeah, so very, very difficult and disappointing to do this book to game comparison. The next one, however, for Alibi and Ashes, I think we might see a little bit more actual crossover. What a concept. So I'm going to leave this here and let you guys think about all this and, the direction that Her Interactive took. And should they have said it was based off of this book? Should they have found another book? Should they have even said it was based off of a book at all? These are questions I'm going to leave with you. And yeah, think about that. I'm curious to know what you all think. Thank you for your time and watching this comparison video. And I look forward to doing the next one. I think the next one will be much more interesting and engaging. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.